So before we get into the old putting up a plaque to honour bastards debate, let's start with some much needed good news. Nigel Farage was removed from his slot on LBC. Here's the thing, I don't like to see anybody losing their job just because they have a different opinion to me. It doesn't make for healthy debate. The problem for Mr F is that ever since the EU referendum, he's become more and more irrelevant. Sort of like the other one in the boy band. Yes, that one. He's had to find other ways of keeping himself in the public eye, as he isn't going to be appearing on Love Island anytime soon. Or panel shows even. For instance, on Would I Lie to You, the answer would always be yes, even before he's had a chance to read out the card. So he set up the Brexit Party, which had moderate success in the European election and no success in the general election. But now Boris is taking us into his no plan, no deal, medicine-free, stock-up-on sanitary products, wait for Bob Geldof to get the pop singers to release a charity record for us, Mad Max Fury Road Brexit. Well, Nigel doesn't really have a lot else in his armour. So following the Brexit Party, he floated the idea of a reform party that would look at getting rid of the first-past-the-post system and replace it with proportional representation. Until it was pointed out to him that in doing so would actually show the majority of people that voted for the pro-EU parties in the last general election. And suddenly, he's found something else to do. Which means in March, while the rest of us were isolating in order to help the NHS and cheering for them, Nigel was taking trips down to Dover to point out where illegal immigrants were coming in, and was then not just surprised but appalled by the fact that policemen came knocking at his door. Ironic for a man against freedom of movement. Basically, as our government's moved further and further to the right, there hasn't been as much wiggle room for old Nige. So he's gone and tipped himself over the edge. He claims that the Black Lives Matter movement was like the Taliban. You remember the Taliban? Sure, the Taliban. Well remembered for getting equal rights for everybody, regardless of race, gender or sexuality. Well, LBC decided this was one unhinged disconnect too many and thanked him for his enormous contribution. By the way, if you are a little upset to see the National Farage go, don't worry. I'm sure there'll be plenty of other soulless broadcasting companies out there, only too happy to kick over a few rocks in order to gain listeners. Oh, and the government's Brexit strategy is coming along swimmingly, by which I mean it's like a statue doing a backstroke in Bristol docks. The latest approach, if we can call it that, is Boris, in the absence of anything relating to a plan, is going to start banging the table to get a deal. Well, we've seen this from Boris before, of course, with coronavirus, and we all know how well that worked out. The problem for Boris is that this stuff is simply too serious for him. He's a bloke that's a bit of a laugh, flying on a zip line or shooting a hoop over his head. It's hard to take him seriously. It's like being told you have a terminal disease from Joe Pasquale. As far as coronavirus, the government is continuing to follow the science right into the precinct, as they want to reduce the 2-metre rule to a 1 metre, which is an arm's length away, or just normal. Seriously, who stands within 1 metre of you that you don't know? I'm guessing it's a horror film most Brits were too scared to see, the invasion of the personal space. For those missing the international football tournaments this summer, Saturday in London gave us a glimpse of what we were missing. Yeah, London was overtaken by fascists giving the Nazi salute who wanted to protect Churchill's statue. And boy, they're going to be pissed when they see what Churchill did. And Boris Johnson said racist thuggery has no place on our streets. Boris Johnson said this. Boris Johnson. Boris. So, people want to protect the statue of Churchill. After all, Churchill won the war. Well, he didn't, any more than Richard Branson installed my Wi-Fi. The war was won by the brave servicemen who fought against fascism. But he was instrumental in stopping Hitler from taking over the bits of Europe he hadn't already. Make no mistake as to just how close Britain came to siding with the fascio-maniac. We had a Hitler-loving king, Hitler-placating prime minister, and much of our papers and hierarchy considered him to be an alright bloke. So there's that. But there's also the racism thing. In our understanding, or indeed any understanding, Churchill was a racist. He believed the white race to be superior to others. He indirectly starved 3 million Indians so the British Army wouldn't go short of rations. Worth mentioning, of course, that was never really likely to happen. So it's difficult. How can you describe a man who through his action was responsible for 3 million deaths as a hero? Alternatively, how can you describe someone whose decisions in fighting Hitler and in Nazism as anything else? By the way, Churchill wasn't the only statue covered up. So was Gandhi and Mandela, but of course you wouldn't have guessed that by looking at the papers. Black Lives Matter, sure, but as far as the papers go, black statues, not so much. Edward Colston's statue was taken down by anti-racism protesters and thrown into Bristol docks. And there's now debate on what to put up in its place. The bizarre thing is, there is no shortage of suitable, indeed, better replacements. There's philanthropist, poet and playwright Hannah More, born in Bristol and a member of a staunch anti-slavery group. I know, right? George Muller, who was the director of the Ashley Down Orphanage in Bristol during the 1800s, where he educated some 10,000 orphans, which really does sound like Colin Firth should be playing him in a historical drama. There's Paul Stevenson, who led Bristol bus boycotts in the 60s when it was still legal to not employ people in this country based on their race. That's right, Bristol. You've got your own rows of friggin' parks right there. And that's not all. And this is my favourite story about him. He hit the national headlines when one evening he goes into a pub and ordered a drink, but the barman wouldn't serve him because of his race. So he refused to leave until he got a drink. And refusing to leave a pub until he gets served has got to be the most British thing I can think of. A statue would be great of him holding a pipe with a plaque that simply said, cheers. As would Cary Grant, who was born in Bristol, Dr. Elizabeth Blackwell, America's first female doctor, she was born in Bristol, as was, well, as I say, these things are complicated. What isn't is the fact that these statues that are placed are celebrating racists and slave traders. I always found this rather baffling. We have so much to be proud of in this country, and we choose to honour and celebrate the worst part of it. It's like Michael Barrymore only boasting about his bronze swimming certificate. And of course, I understand people are complicated. If I asked, should we have a statue to a man who raised £50 million to charity and each week for nearly 2 decades on primetime television made children's impossible dreams come true, you would probably say, yes, let's do it. If I said, fine, it's this guy, I suspect you would be a bit more lukewarm to the idea. Here's the problem. Look, we don't put up statues to teach us history. We have books for that. We put them up for pride. There's a reason that if you go to Anfield, there's a statue outside to Bob Paisley, and not one to Roy Hodgson. Anyway, surely a statue shouldn't just be an homage to an otherwise forgotten figure. It should stand as a reminder of the things that you want your society to be, right? Fairness, respect, and overcoming adversity, and inspiration, in other words. Statues tend to be over 6 foot tall, so we can literally and metaphorically look up to them and aspire to be like them. Not, look at this guy, he was so rich he bought people. Pretty sure that's sending the wrong signal. And finally, for those saying our history is being erased, I thought I would mention this. The Mau Mau uprising in Kenya in 1952 resulted in one of the more depressing moments in British history, ending in some 1.5 million Kenyans kept in a network of detention camps and heavily patrolled villages. It was a tale of systematic violence and high-level cover-ups. Yes, cover-ups. When in 2008, a legal team who were helping to sue the British government for torture tried to find records of those incarcerated, they found them all to be destroyed. 250,000 records no longer existing. So we have no problem erasing history if we want. It certainly gives some perspective to not being able to watch Little Britain on a streaming service. In fact, since the introduction of the internet, if you want to buy something, you can. Really. You can go on eBay now, and for a mere £55 plus £9.50 postage, you can buy a 1996 Gary Glitter Who's in the Gang Tour t-shirt. Order now to get by mid-July. So pull down the past. Let's concentrate on a monumental future. So, prediction time. And if you remember last week, I said that Boris Johnson would be PM by the end of the year. Only 6 months, 2 weeks and a day to go. Well, this week, I'm looking over the Atlantic to the orangutan in the Oval Office and saying he won't be re-elected. Now, I'm aware that that's what people said last time, but I think there may have been voter apathy in place, which won't happen this time. Also, 117,000 coronavirus deaths. Any which way you cut it, that's horrifying. And even though the election isn't till November, well, when it comes to seeing loved ones die, people tend to have long memories. The real problem, of course, is what will Trump do when he isn't re-elected? Maybe I should have a look at that. Well, thanks for watching, everybody. Stay safe, and if you're enjoying the vids, please make sure you don't miss another one by subscribing and hitting the notification bell. And I'll see you all next week. Take care.